Is the new DC Universe off to a better start than the MCU? To answer that, we're gonna put Creature Commandos, Superman, and Peacemaker Season 2 head-to-head against the first 3 projects from Marvel's Phase 1. We'll look at them across 4 categories, and each round has a winner. Whoever ends up with the most points had the better start, simple as that. The first point goes to project quality. The MCU started strong with Iron Man 1, still one of the best origin movies ever. Tony's arc works great. They really sell the idea of the most narcissistic guy on Earth getting a reality check and realizing he can do more than build weapons. Watching him go from selfish billionaire to actual hero is super satisfying, and they make the most arrogant guy ever into a fan favorite. Plus, the effects still look great today. Its only weak spots are that it's a pretty standard origin story without big surprises, and the villain is kinda lame. Just another bad guy with the same abilities as the hero, which was the trend back in the 2000s. This movie was a solid 8. Then we got The Incredible Hulk, probably the most underrated movie in the whole MCU, cause now it seems like nobody likes it.
Well, I do.
Just like Iron Man, the movie's strength was in its main character. You really felt for Bruce, and you wanted people to leave him alone. The action was great, with Hulk fighting all kinds of enemies. Some people complained about the heavy CGI, but what did they expect? Hulk and Abomination smashing everything with practical effects? The weakest part was Bruce's relationship with Betty, which felt kind of CW-ish. And once again, the villain was forgettable. Abomination's redesign was fine, but as a character, he didn't stand out at all. I'd give it a 7, but I know that a lot of people would rate it lower. Marvel's third project was Iron Man 2, which didn't even come close to the first one. The effects were solid, and War Machine looked awesome, but the movie was so boring. There was barely any action. Tony and Pepper's dynamic got old fast. The villains were forgettable, and they over-sexualized Black Widow. The only real highlight was this scene, and the movie managed to survive because RDJ was super charismatic. For me, it was easily the weakest film in Phase 1, and on a bad day, one of the worst in the entire Infinity Saga. I give it a 5, but if you catch me in a bad mood, a 2. So on average, the MCU's quality was a 6, all thanks to Iron Man 2.
Maybe I am a complete hack. The absolute worst.
The new DCU started with Creature Commandos, an animated show where James Gunn reused the Guardians and Suicide Squad formula. It wasn't the most original thing ever, but it was the most emotional project we're talking about today. Big shout out to Gunn for making us care about a bunch of unknowns and making us wanna give Weasel a hug. Sadly, the villain was as weak as Abomination, but hey, at least the animation was awesome. It's a 7 for me. Then we got Superman, which stood out because it was colorful and comic booky. It easily had the best cast, the best Lois Lane on film, the best Lex Luthor, and Karen Sweat crushed it as Superman. If not for Robert Downey Jr., this movie would have had the best lead performance of all these projects. The action was solid, the message was sweet, and there's one emotional scene that gets me teary every time. They also made Superman both inspiring and relatable. I know the comic book tone didn't land for everyone, because the pacing and storytelling felt different from the usual theatrical style. But I gotta give it an 8, and that might even be underselling it a bit. The last DCU project was Peacemaker Season 2. It had funny moments, emotional moments, and John Cena delivered a great performance. It's tricky to compare it to the others since there isn't a real supervillain, just a tough situation for Chris to face, chasing love and respect, even if it means finding it in another universe. It had some of DC's best character development to compete with Iron Man 1, the Earth X twist was awesome, and episodes 6 and 7 were bangers. But it had even less action than Iron Man 2, Peacemaker didn't use any of his helmets, and the ending felt more like a setup for future projects than an actual conclusion. If it weren't for the ending, I give it an 8, but to be fair, let's go with a 7. That puts the DCU with a score of 7 overall, so the point for quality goes to DC. The second point is money. Iron Man 1 had a $140 million budget and made $585 million, so it was a huge hit. The Incredible Hulk cost $150 million, pretty much the same, but it only made $264. If we go by the rule that a movie needs to make about 2.5 times its budget to be profitable, it fell short by about $100 million, so it was a big box office flop. That's why Universal didn't greenlight another Hulk movie. They saw this one as a financial failure. Iron Man 2, on the other hand, cost $200 million, which is crazy, and made $623. That's even more than the first one, so another hit. Plus, it made $128 million an opening weekend in the US. The best numbers out of all the movies we're comparing. It solidified Iron Man as the face of the MCU, and guaranteed Marvel would make a third movie.
So maybe I'm not such a loser after all.
According to Variety, Superman cost $225 million and made $615. Using the same rule as Iron Man, it was definitely profitable. Warner considered it such a success that they announced the sequel just a month and a half after release. 698,000 US households watched it on digital, making it the biggest release of 2025. It shot to the top of the iTunes charts, tied for number 1 on Amazon for a while, followed in 13 million global viewers on HBO Max, and even debuted at number 4 on the Nielsen movie chart. Superman was an absolute hit. The problem here is that Creature Commandos and Peacemaker are on HBO Max, so it's way harder to figure out how profitable they were. The best thing we can do is look at the ratings for both shows to see if they met expectations or not. According to Luminate data, Creature Commandos was the third most watched show during its first full week on Max, and it hit the number 2 spot on the platform not long after it dropped. Parrot Analytics said the show's audience demand was 18.7 times higher than the average TV series in the US, putting it in the top 2.7% of all shows airing at the time. These aren't Stranger Things or House of the Dragon numbers, but it was such a big hit for HBO Max that they quickly greenlit a second season. So it was a success. Peacemaker Season 2 had a 22% increase over the Season 1 finale's 4-day viewership, and that finale was already the most watched episode of the show. Season 1 had been HBO Max's most watched series when it premiered, so Season 2 beating those numbers was huge, especially for a show nobody expected much from. And the finale also broke records. With 167 million minutes watched in its first week, it became the first DC show on HBO to hit Nielsen's top 10.
Business. Numbers. Is this working?
Some people say it barely made the list, but The Penguin and Agatha didn't even get on the list last year, and it's not like those went unseen. Like Creature Commandos, Peacemaker met expectations, so it's a win. With 3 wins and no flops, the DCU takes the second point. The third point is cultural impact. How much influence these projects had on pop culture, how many fans they got, and how popular the characters and actors became. Phase 1 started at a disadvantage compared to the new DCU. They didn't even have Marvel's most iconic characters. Iron Man wasn't anywhere near the top 10 most well-known superheroes, but people loved the movie and fell for Robert Downey Jr. Now he's on the superhero Mount Rushmore, right next to Christopher Reeve and Hugh Jackman. Sure, his popularity peaked around 2018-2019, but none of that would have happened without his tremendous introduction in these first 2 movies. And remember, back in the 2000s, nobody was making movies about lesser-known heroes, which makes Iron Man's cultural impact even more impressive. Hulk, on the other hand, kinda fell behind, since they didn't even keep Edward Norton in the lead role. I gotta admit, when I was in school, everyone was talking about this movie, and you can't deny that a lot of kids became Hulk fans because of it. But it wasn't a genre-defining film. Now, the one with the least cultural impact was Creature Commandos. Even though the show was good, it didn't get people dressing up as bride at Comic-Con or anything. The only notable thing was that it beat What If as the best animated superhero show, since they both dropped around the same time. But it didn't even have the buzz of My Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man, since people stopped talking about it pretty quickly, and I doubt anyone will bring it up again until season 2 comes out. Superman is a whole different story. This movie became a social media phenomenon the second they dropped the first picture. The teaser pulled in 250 million views in 24 hours, becoming the most watched trailer in DC and Warner Bros. History. It crushed Fantastic Four and helped DC beat Marvel at the box office for the first time since 2008. It also turned a whole new generation into Superman fans, thanks to the fresh take on the character. In terms of social media impact, it was way bigger than all 3 Iron Man movies combined, mainly because social media wasn't massive 17 years ago. But it's still too early to know if David Corenswet will reach Robert Downey Jr. status. It seemed like RDJ was born to play Iron Man from day one. Also, neither Iron Man nor Hulk had haters the way Gunn's Superman does, because they came out in totally different eras. The upside is that even people who didn't like the movie are still talking about it, which didn't happen in the MCU until the first Avengers. And then there's Peacemaker. His rise to fame was very similar to Iron Man's. Nobody cared about him at first, and now he's one of the faces of the DCU. It feels impossible to picture anyone but John Cena playing the character, since the show became a redemption arc for both Peacemaker and the actor. But most of that credit goes to season 1, which doesn't count here because it technically belonged to the old DC universe. The standout thing in season 2 was the mystery that kept us hooked, but that still doesn't compare to what Marvel pulled off with Iron Man 1.
I'm the best.
If Man of Tomorrow becomes an even bigger hit than Superman, and DC turns into a trusted theatrical brand again, then maybe we can talk about giving them the cultural impact point. But for now, it goes to the MCU for what they did with Iron Man, and for proving that a cinematic universe could work. And since we're talking about that, the next point is universe building, because these aren't standalone movies. The MCU was a trailblazer in this area. In Iron Man 1, the only hint that we're in a bigger universe comes in the post-credit scene, where Nick Fury talks to Tony about the Avengers. They also brought in S.H.I.E.L.D., included a Stan Lee cameo, and set the tone for using post-credit scenes to tie everything together. The Incredible Hulk worked in a similar way. It feels like a typical solo movie until General Ross mentions that they need to take Abomination to the raft, Marvel's go-to maximum security prison, and in the post-credits, Tony shows up talking about putting a team together, which linked directly back to the first Iron Man in a way we'd never seen before. That didn't make much sense later on, since we find out Tony wasn't in charge of recruiting the team, and it's weird that he'd be talking to Ross, considering how bad things were between him and Bruce. But still, they get credit for connecting 2 separate movies. In Iron Man 2, Marvel leveled up with the universe building. They introduced War Machine in full armor, brought in Black Widow, gave S.H.I.E.L.D. a bigger role, and gave Nick Fury more screen time. On top of that, the post-credit scene showed Agent Coulson standing next to Thor's hammer. And if you wanna go full conspiracy mode, they supposedly already introduced Spider-Man, since this little kid in the Iron Man mask is supposed to be Peter Parker.
I don't buy it.
The DCU had a much more rushed universe building process. In Creature Commandos, they showed that magic existed, and people were already used to others having wild powers. They talked about 2 government-run metahuman teams, introduced one of Wonder Woman's major enemies, and even brought in a Batman villain. They also showed a vision of the future where all the DC heroes were killed by Princess Ilana Rostovich and Gorilla Grodd. In Superman, they brought in the Justice Gang, Kang, introduced Supergirl, showed way more superhero interactions than the first 3 MCU movies, and brought back Rick Flag. Then in Peacemaker, we saw Flag again. They added Salvation as a metahuman prison, introduced Checkmate, and even touched on the multiverse, something that took Marvel 13 years to pull off. If we're talking sheer number of characters and how big the universe feels, the point should go to the DCU, but that'd be cheating, since a big chunk of that came from the old universe. Peacemaker and its entire cast were introduced in the Suicide Squad, and Season 2 pulls stuff from the first Suicide Squad movie, which was tied to Batman v Superman and Man of Steel. If we're gonna count those, then we also have to consider all of MCU Phase 1, which features the Avengers. And even though the DCU feels bigger than the early MCU, it also feels more scattered and inconsistent. They had to do a retcon in the previously on segment of Peacemaker just to make Season 1 fit within the universe. So the fair move here is give a point to each. That leaves the MCU with 2 points and the DCU with 3. So the DCU had a stronger start, and I don't wanna hear any complaints about it. But even if they kick things off well, this whole universe could fall apart real quick. They could even fire James Gunn. I'll tell you why in this video.